Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Life by Design podcast. On this week's episode, I speak with Derrick Grant. Derrick is an entrepreneur, author, former Harlem Globetrotter, and one of the world's most sought after life strategists. He has helped empower millions of people from around the world with his audio programs, educational videos, and live seminars. Spanning the globe to over 70 countries, people have enjoyed the charisma, humour, and transformational power of DG's business and personal development programs. In this week's episode, expect to learn how to create abundance and alignment in your life, becoming heart-led, the impact of sacred wounds, how your belief system is impacting your life, how shame impacts your life, and much, much more. Enjoy the episode. Mr. DG Mindset, Derrick Grant, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, Blake.
What do you get more of, Derrick or DG these days?
You know, when I hear Derrick, it sounds foreign. People call me DG now because of DG Mindset. So I would say DG is my name when I introduce myself to somebody.
Maybe your family call you your first name when you're in trouble, you know?
Yeah. If my wife ever calls me DG, I know something's wrong.
I get it, brother. I get it. I totally get it. Mate, really looking forward to chatting today. Have loved your work for quite a while now. So looking forward to deep diving into that. But before we get started, can you give the guys a 60 to 90 second spiel of who you are and what's got you to where you are today?
Yeah. I like to say I'm a mindset performance coach who helps individuals get out of their own way. I learned through the course of my life that a lot of the issues that I was struggling with, a lot of the suffering that was in my life was created due to my unawareness of who I was. And I started on a journey to figure out myself. And now my journey, my mission is to help others figure out themselves.
What for you started was there a tipping point in when you realized that there was a lack of awareness? Like what happened for you to start that transition?
Yeah, I endured what I like to call the sacred wound. Back in 2019, I lost everything. I had a business partner, ended up being a victim of fraud. And through this, my biggest fears came true. What if I can't provide for my family? What if I lose everything? And now here I am, the ego crumbled and I got to see what was left. And it was through this repairing of like, who am I actually? Now that these things that I thought I was are not here, who am I? And it was through asking those questions and what are my fears? What are my insecurities? And all of this stuff was being brought up. It allowed me to see really who I am. And that's kind of where it started.
Mate, I did not know your timeline, but it's very similar to mine in terms of absolutely everything crumbling. So because awareness is an interesting one when you lack awareness. It's kind of hard to find. So was it a coach, a therapist reflecting back to you? Like what principles did you take on initially? As you build more awareness, it's easier, but in those early stages, how do you start?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been super inquisitive, right? I'm the kid in class when the teacher tells you the sky is blue. I want to know why it's blue, and then I want to know the reason behind why it was blue. So when I went through this turmoil internally, I started to self-contemplate and ask myself these questions. I would hire a babysitter to watch my kids. I'd get a chair and go sit out in the woods for hours and just ask myself, like, what are your biggest fears? Like, what do you struggle with? What are you afraid of? And it was through this self-contemplation that like we do with any other human being, I got to know myself through asking myself these questions and being super honest and vulnerable. But I think for me personally, I've always been curious and inquisitive, but I always tell people that I work with, like, start with the places that you're afraid to touch. Like start to uncover, like, what are your biggest insecurities? What are your fears? And you will start to better understand yourself if you can go there.
What for you? I love that. I love the Joseph Campbell quote around the darkest cave. So, what for you was the darkest cave that you were avoiding the most in 2019 that you had to dive into?
Yeah, for the longest, I was walking around unbeknownst to me with a victim state of mind. And this business partner that I got involved with, I realized that I had manifested this in my life because I had a program going on in my mind saying, I can't do it unless somebody helps me. I can't figure it out unless somebody who's smarter than me can do it. And that laid me or put me in a position to be taken advantage of because I didn't believe that I could. So I look back and it was really hard, if I'm being honest, Blake. It was really like I had to be open and honest with myself and be accountable and say, like, you have a narrative that you think you can't do it and you need somebody else to help you and you need somebody else to do it for you. And it was a hard pill to swallow, but it was also liberating once I realized the root cause of it was from this program that was going on within me.
So did you have two kids at the time when this started to
Yes.
crumble?
Yeah, I had two kids. They were 6 and 3 at the time.
I would imagine if it's anything like mine, and I do not have kids yet, one on the way, but there's more pressure when everything crumbles around you when you have kids. Did you find yourself in this dance between surrendering and allow? Because you've also got to make moves. Like you've got mouths to feed. So were you able to completely surrender and give yourself space, or was it a case of like, shit, I need to make things happen and find the space as well?
Yeah, it was probably the latter. It was really challenging. I remember one time
Mm.
I just lost it. I just broke down, and my kids, they were so young, and they're like, "Daddy, why are you crying?" And it's like, as the father, is the provider of the household. You try to hold it together, and I just got to a point where it was just so heavy. But really, in that moment, once I like was able to release it, and I didn't have to be this tough, strong guy who holds it all together, it was like, okay, now we can start rebuilding. I've let it out. I released it. And really, I mean, if I'm being honest, it was hard, especially for my marriage, because at the time, my wife was a stay-at-home mom with the kids. And here we are struggling to make ends meet. She had to go back to work. So that was tough on her. And it wasn't just me personally who was going through it. It was a sacred wound for everybody.
So what this is wild for many men who would be in this predicament of things crumbling. Was it easy for you to step into that conversation of like, I need you to go back to work? Was there a lot of shame around it? Like, how do you navigate something
Oh,
like that as well?
I can't even
Mm.
words won't do justice the amount of guilt, the amount of shame that I was walking with. Like it was my fault. It was my business partner. And she's actually the one who was kind of like, we don't have time to like sit here and feel sorry for ourselves. We got to figure something out. I'm going back to work. And, I always tell her like, she's really the warrior. She's the hero in the family because when I was at my lowest, she was the one who was like, come on, let's get it together. Uh, but it's also interesting too, as I started on this personal development journey and she was at work, the table started to turn. And as I started to kind of pick myself up, she slowly started to sink down and, depression and really not enjoying this aspect of her life of being away from the kids. So I was able to be the one who could pick her up. So it was cool to see how the tables had turned and we both were there for each other in the space in the way that we needed.
It can be really hard um, for women to know how to navigate a situation like that when a man's world crumbles and there's the shame and the guilt and the fear and the judgment and the embarrassment. What did you need and potentially what did you get in that time that helped you find the space to allow yourself to feel and process, but also not stay in the darkness for too long?
Yeah, the big thing is I would say like a lot, especially with a lot of men, like we carry so much guilt when things don't work out or go as planned because we feel as though we have to carry everything. So for me, like sitting down and having a conversation with my wife and having a conversation with myself saying, it's not your fault. You don't have to carry guilt. My wife said it. She goes, I know you're blaming yourself, but I also signed off on you doing business with this person too. So it isn't just you. You don't have to carry the burden of it. So I always tell men and I tell guys that I work with, like, you got to make space for grace with yourself. I don't know how it is over there, but we like, especially in our culture here in America, it's like you got to be perfect. You can't make flaws. You can't make mistakes. And they're like, no, provide a space for yourself. So when you have a mistake, you can learn from it and you're not beating yourself up, but instead you've shown yourself compassion so you can learn and grow and evolve from it.
How do you dance personally in your relationship with the not wanting to burden your partner as a masculine man, but also not wanting to go into avoidance? And I think this is where a lot of men are confused. Am I avoiding or am I actually just doing what I deem a masculine role by not adding burden to my partner? Like, how do you navigate that for yourself?
Yeah, I've been on this journey here for about 6 years, and the one thing I can tell you that has given me kind of the balance of that is knowing myself, like really knowing who I am. So I won't be labeled of whether or not you're masculine enough or are you man enough for your household. It was like, no, like I can't go by somebody else's standards because I may be man enough for you, but maybe for somebody else I'm not. So it really took me reflecting and saying, wait, are you being who you know you can be? Are you doing what you know you can do? And having those open and honest conversations with myself, and then not allowing somebody else's perspective of me to shape my self-concept, that has helped me immensely, and not falling victim to like feeling like I need to be something that I'm really not.
So for you over the last, what's that, 6 years, what's that process been in terms of your own evolution? Is there certain, like obviously a lot of awareness, a lot of reflection, a lot of contemplation, but outside of that, what has helped you the most in terms of continuing to expand your consciousness? Is it certain modalities? Is it the environment? And I'm assuming it's a mix of everything, but like what's had the
Sure.
biggest impact for you as you kind of expand your awareness and mental space?
Yeah. So it started off with like, the common modalities, meditation, journaling, right? Breath work, stuff like that. I read a lot, but then more importantly, like I started to like look at my own life and see like, okay, I struggled with this, but how did I get over that? Like figuring out the steps and the processes of how I work through things in my own life. Um, that was probably the first thing. And then as I started to get the hang of it as my processes and systems of how like I work through distorted self-concepts and things that have happened, trauma, whatever that has shaped my perspective today. When you couple that with like plant medicine or like other probably more powerful modalities, it's been a game changer.
What for you? That's interesting. I'm a big fan of plant medicine. What has that journey looked like for you? What have you been involved in, and how often over the last kind of 6 years?
Yeah, so I'm the guy who, never drank, never smoked weed, never did anything growing up. And so when I started to move into this space of personal development, I got to a point where like the books couldn't do it anymore, right? I can't journal and meditate enough now. Like this, it's what's the next level? And I started with psilocybin mushrooms and having psilocybin mushroom ceremonies. And then I got to a point after 2 years of that, and I would do it about once every 6 months. I always tell people like I wanted to dive deeper, find what was in me, and then spend the next 6 months integrating it, and then go back deeper with another ceremony. And then after 2 years of that, I got to a point where I'm like, okay, what's the next level? And that's just when ayahuasca came in. And I think in the last year, I've had 8 ceremonies. Yeah, 8 ceremonies. So that's been profound. I mean, for anybody who's listening or yourselves ever experienced ayahuasca, I mean, it is a powerful healing medicine that really, really helps. So that's kind of where I'm at right now with everything.
Very similar
Yeah.
timeline. So, for someone beginning their journey of understanding themselves better, raising their awareness, expanding their consciousness, if we're talking absolute beginner, where would you start? Because if I had my time again, for the first kind of 15 years of my personal development, I was very outward, reading the books, doing the podcast, and a very
Sure.
small percentage of self-reflection, contemplation, psychedelics, etc. But
Mm,
I got 15 years into my personal development journey. I was like, fuck, I've got no idea who I am. And then I've reversed kind of that process to do a lot of contemplation, meditation, vipassanas, psychedelics, etc. What would
mm.
you recommend for someone starting out?
I would always start with your beliefs, your perspective, and see where those started. So like anytime I start working with somebody, ask them what's a lot of money to you? And they say, oh, well, $1 million. Okay. Why? Because that same amount of money isn't very much to LeBron James, maybe. Like, where did we develop this perspective? And it's through seeing where you develop your lens of how you see your life. And that's really what I was telling about, like self-reflection, self-contemplation. I started to ask myself, why do I believe this about myself? And I started to see that a lot of my self concepts, a lot of the way I see myself is actually my dad's. It's the way I believe my father or my mother see me. And that was like, I mean, it was life changing because I realized that I'm not actually living my life. I'm living my life for somebody else's perspective, even though it's my parents. But start with what do you believe and where did those beliefs start? And are those beliefs yours? We can start with, finances, whether it's, what does success look like to you? Marriage, family, like fatherhood. Where did you develop these perspectives from? And I think that's a good place to start.
One of the amazing things, obviously, a skill set of yours, and I think potentially a challenge for a lot of people, is you, based on what you just said and looking into your work, have a level of being able to be subjective or objective to your beliefs. Whereas a lot of people, I'm guessing the majority, if they have a belief, they believe it, and therefore they're looking for evidence to back it up. So,
Mm-hmm.
what's the process required for you to create separation from the belief and essentially
Yeah.
challenge it?
I had to realize, because when I was playing with the Globetrotters, I traveled to 70 different countries. So that broadened my perspective. I was able to see how people in other parts of the world live differently. Like they had a different lens of perception of how they viewed life. So I was able to see, oh, wait, not everybody has the same beliefs. So then what is a belief? It's a story that we tell ourselves over and over again. So when my wife went back to work, she worked for the church, big, huge church organization. So she was saying that there were 26 different denominations just within Christianity. And I'm like, so you mean there's like 26 different teams like within one thing? Like, and I started to see like even within this belief system, there's different beliefs. And it flipped my whole world upside down because we always process beliefs as being true. They're just true to you. And when I zoomed out, I realized, oh my goodness, my beliefs are just my beliefs, but they're not absolutely true. I can shift and mold my belief system based on the life that I want to live. And that's for me where like a switch went off. I guess you call it like a paradigm when I realized like I can develop my own paradigms, my own beliefs, my own programs.
It's such an easy concept um, to understand that your beliefs are just yours, but I assume for the majority of people to actually the embodiment of it and the separation of it, which in part I guess comes down to the ego, is part of the challenging process for a lot of people.
Yeah, I always ask them what their beliefs are, right? And then when I ask them, they explain it, and I'm like, well, I don't believe that. So who's right and who's wrong? And
That's a
at
great way
that
to put
moment,
it.
it's like, yeah, they get to see like, oh, well, one's not more right and one's more not more wrong. It's just a belief. So yeah.
What happens for you in a process like that? Because my first thought is if there were two sets of belief, my first thought would be which belief's potentially going to serve me better. So what's
Mm.
the next evolution of that for you if you're taking someone through that process?
Yeah. So I always, anytime I work with somebody, I always try to introduce like non-dualistic thinking, right? So let's not look at it in terms of right or wrong or good or bad or which one's better. Let's just look at it and say, here's what it is. Which one feels like it resonates more? Which one, if I were to go that way, that feels like it's going to give me a higher energy, a higher vibration. So where we get in trouble sometimes, I know myself, when the ego will process better as being good, but not necessarily because the one that wasn't better, that may actually help you to evolve and grow so much more. And I start to see a lot of people I work with, they're afraid to make decisions because they think better means they have a program that if I don't choose the right decision here, I'm a failure. I'm not good enough. So they end up making decisions out of fear. So I always say, whatever road you take, it's going to end up at the same place. Find the one that resonates with you when it comes to your belief system or what you want to believe.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What's your take on ego? I was looking at one of your posts last night, and I really
Mm.
resonated. For a lot of people who haven't dived deep into ego, it's easy to understand this as an inflated sense of self, and that's a very kind of surface level, I guess, form of ego. But how would you describe the ego and also the benefits of the ego?
Yeah, I would say like there's two sides of it. Most of us live on the unconscious side of the ego. right? And then we have the conscious side, which maybe we'll refer to as the soul, right? But we're talking about the same thing, one's heads, one's tails. The ego is our unconscious perspectives, our unconscious self-concepts that were developed usually out of a program, out of a trauma response, out of somebody else's perspective. So the ego's not the enemy, though. This is the thing where a lot of people are like, oh, the ego's the enemy. It's like, no, it's a tool, just like a hammer. If you don't know how to use a hammer, you'll break everything and everything looks like a nail to you. But if you know what the tool is and you have awareness behind it, you can go and build a house. So I always say the mind has two parts. We have the conscious part, we have the unconscious part. The ego is the unconscious part. It's your job, as Dr. Carl Jung said, is to bring awareness to what you were unaware of. And that's why, like, anybody I work with, I always tell them, like, if you're triggered or something comes up, tell that person thank you, because they're showing you an unconscious part of you that you can become more conscious of. And this is how we grow. This is how we evolve.
So how do you use the ego to your advantage?
Yeah, so I just got back from a ceremony, ayahuasca ceremony last week, and I got to 2-day ceremony. I got to really sit with my ego and that part of me that lives in guilt, that lives in shame, that lives in judgment. I realize that part of me that I'm unconscious of, it's also the gateway to a new level of consciousness. So it's like, however unaware I am, if I can get to that, I'm going to become that much more aware. So like, I view it as like a dance, as a partnership. It's not something that's negative. It's like, hey, here's the darkness. Come on down here, figure out what's in there, and then we'll give you equal proportion of light now on the other side. So I view it as like, I get excited when I find new things within me that I had no idea that were in me.
How do you personally, 6 years on from when this, I guess, kind of erupted, how do you move through the world differently with a expanded awareness, expanded consciousness? Like, is there new practices that you bring into play? To your point just then, the trigger is the teacher. I'm guessing you often sit with things that kind of trigger you, but like, what do you notice has shifted for you in terms of your everyday movement with more awareness?
I've become super aware of like what's going on from moment to moment within me. Like, how do I feel? Like, more importantly, what's the thought behind that feeling right now? Little stuff. Like, I was in the airport today and I was traveling, and you see, all walks of life. And like, just sitting back and observing the ego looking and casting judgment. Oh, well, look at those shoes. Oh, well, look at the way their hair is. Like, one thing that has changed for me, I will say, like, is becoming aware and observing the ego unconsciously looking at things and forming judgment, looking at things from a dualistic perspective. So I don't know if plant medicine necessarily, it definitely helped, but I always tell people, like, bare minimum, if you can't do anything, journal. Journaling every day has been something that, like, I will do it faithfully. And it doesn't matter if there's nothing going on. If I'm thinking about hot dogs, I'm going to write down that I'm thinking about hot dogs. But it allows you to start to become aware of what's going on in the background. And that's a huge thing that's probably changed my life, from the everyday facet of it.
A lot of people, they hear about journaling, but they're not really sure of structure. Do you have a structure around how you journal?
Yeah, I usually just start off with, I feel ... or today I am ... And I'm writing how I feel. I'm putting everything out there. I'm taking what maybe is playing in the background and I'm not too conscious of. I'm becoming conscious of it. And it's also a form of release. It's a form of purging. You're letting it out. You're not just holding on to it. And I found that I don't have such ups and downs throughout the days. It's now pretty even keel. So, and I attribute that to journaling and just becoming more aware.
What's your take, or what's your definition of abundance, and how has that come about for you over the last 6 years from essentially kind of the rock bottom that you spoke about at the start?
Yeah, I thought abundance had to do with like what you had, what you've materially accumulated. And I started to realize that abundance is just the opposite end of scarcity. Scarcity doesn't have anything to do with what you don't have. I know people who have materialistically, they have a lot of things, but they still have a scarce mindset. So I process abundance is you're not moving in fear. You're not moving in shame. You're not moving in guilt. You're not looking at what you don't have. You're figuring out a way to look at what you do have. It's the old adage, the glass is half empty or half full. It's a perspective. It's a mindset. And I really had to make the choice, Blake, back in 2019. I remember, I'll never forget. It's like, I heard like my higher self say, change the way you look at it. Everything that I looked at was from a scarce mindset. I had two parents who grew up in the 1950s with nothing, who had conditioned me with a scarce mindset. So now I'm not looking at the possibilities of what could happen. I'm looking at how hard it's going to be for it to happen. And that subtle difference makes the world of it makes a difference, because now there's a fear of taking action. There's a fear of failure. There's a fear of trying. Whereas when you have an abundant mindset, now my mind says, well, if it doesn't work, we'll figure out how to do it next time. And there's not a fear behind it. So to answer your question, I think an abundant mindset is essentially faith. Belief is driving the force of whatever you are doing, instead of fear, instead of shame.
For a lot of people, when they experience a level of fame or success or wealth, etc., and they have a background of poverty mindset, or even poverty, they find ways to self-sabotage. So based on your upbringing and your parents being kind of light on financially, what showed up for you when it came to Harlem Globetrotters and a level of kind of fame and success that comes with that?
Yeah, there was I'd say imposter syndrome, right? Not feeling worthy of getting to the top of the mountain. We all want to get to the top of the mountain, but I really didn't feel like I was worthy. And then you could see subtle actions that would keep me from getting to the top of the mountain. And that's where the self-sabotage would come in. So I started to realize this even when I was done playing basketball in business. Yeah, we want to do this and we want to do that and we do that. But then when you really zoom in, it's like, well, how come you're not doing that and you're not doing this and you're not doing it? That's because there's a fractured part of the ego in the back that's saying, we're unworthy. We're not good enough of doing that. Nobody else in your family has ever done that before. So how are you going to do that? So this is where I always tell people, like, if you want to grow your business, you want to grow whatever it is, you have to grow on the inside first, because everything will be in direct proportion to your level of self-worth and how you see yourself.
So what for you, there's obviously been a number of things over the last kind of 6 years. What for you would be, let's say someone comes to you with a process or kind of a piece around feeling unworthy. Some people want to do affirmations in the mirror. Some people want to get to the core of worthiness. Some people, want to, like, what would you be your starting point if someone had a clear piece around worth?
Yeah, that's where when I wrote the book in 2024 called The 7 Laws of Healing the Inner Child. These 7 steps, the first step is awareness. You can't fix something that you're not aware of, right? Start to become aware of when you're triggered or you feel unworthy or you feel insecure. Become aware of those moments. And that's the first step. And then once you become aware, you can move into law number 2, which is acceptance. Meaning you're not denying anymore how you feel. You're not putting on a mask and fronting and act like, no, I'm fine, I'm good. No, like, admit to yourself that you feel insecure right now, or you feel like you're not worthy of doing X, Y, and Z. And then I think where the game changes is we move into law number 3, which is the law of compassion, where you go back to that version of you. Maybe it's the 6-year-old boy who was bullied, or maybe it's the 10-year-old who was made to feel less than or was abandoned by dad. You go back to that version of you and you write a letter to it. And you tell it everything that you needed to hear growing up. So I went back and did this. I've done this a couple times, and both on paper and in ceremonies. And there's such a cathartic release, because your voice was the only voice that resonated with you 100%. It was good to get it from mom. It was good to get it from dad, but you really needed to hear it from yourself. So I would say start with awareness, accept that this is a part of your life, getting to the root, and then go back and give compassion. Suffer with that version of you, sit with it, give it what it needs. And now the healing of that distorted self-concept that felt unworthy, the process can start now.
On my social media, there's a lot of people that, in the coaching space, the mindset, the human behavior, performance, One thing that stands out to me about you is your ability to articulate is as good as anyone I've seen
Mm,
ever. Is that a skill
thank
that
you.
you've always had, or how have you developed, and how do you get that kind of mind to voice to kind of connect in the way that you do?
Yeah, no, thank you. I think because I sat and asked myself that question because somebody else had asked me that. And the analogy I'll give you, I told my wife this when I like say I was to eat a sandwich. When I eat a sandwich, I'm not just eating and then swallowing it. Like I'm trying to taste every ingredient in it, and then I'm trying to taste how much of each ingredient was put into that sandwich. So, like I told you when I wanted to know why the sky was blue. I just always want to know why, and because I keep asking why, I get down to the most simplest level. And when you start understanding how this universe works, once you understand pretty much the framework of how the universe works, it's holographic in nature, and like it becomes really simple in terms of like, okay, this will always yield this, and this yields this. So I just want to know more. I always want to know like on the most simplest level because I'm a pretty simple guy, and then yeah, it takes care of itself. It's pretty easy to explain things that are like you when you simplified it.
I assume with that, there's a level of one awareness, which obviously has been a big catalyst for you over the last 6 years, but also like slowing down and presence, which for a lot
Mm.
of people would be really challenging because they're trying to almost speed up often. Is that something that
Mm.
you've been really intentional with?
Yeah, I've really slowed down in my life. A couple years ago, 2 years ago, I went and sat in a darkness retreat where I sat in a cave. I went on Monday and came out on Friday. It was pitch black, nobody talked to, nothing. And the reason why I went in there is because I wanted to experience time without having a watch, a phone, or the sunlight, something that was always like, I got to hurry and get this done before the sun goes down. I got to do. So I was able to sit in there and realize like I'm creating this hurry up pressure of like time. It's not actually there. It's psychologically being inflicted upon myself. So slowing down, my dad used to always tell me, son, don't be in a hurry to run down the hill. And like life's going to take you down the hill. It's going to take you down. Like it's just going to keep moving. So stop being in such a hurry because there's so much for you to learn along the journey. And that's the way I live my life.
How was the darkness retreat? I've seen Aubrey Marcus talk about it.
Oh yeah.
It seems pretty wild. What changed from you from day one? I think he said day three, shit really started to go a bit pear-shaped. What was your
Yeah.
experience?
Yeah. So when I went in on Monday, by Tuesday evening, I think I had realized why I was in there. Up until that point, I had only really talked about self-acceptance and what like into on an intellectual level, but I got to actually experience it because I could see all of these programs, these reoccurring thoughts that kept worrying, like stressing me out. And now that I'm in this cave and there's nothing to see or no one to talk to, I'm like, why are these thoughts going on? What is it that you're afraid of? Why do you keep thinking about the same thing? And it was through asking these questions I started to get to the root of you're afraid that if you don't hit a certain number or this doesn't happen, you won't be good enough. And realizing that it was like, I don't accept myself. It's conditional. Do this and now we're good enough, or hit that mark and then we're good enough. So it was something. And here's the beauty of it, I couldn't run from it. I mean, I was in there for another 2.5 days. I couldn't run from it. I really had to sit in this lack of self-acceptance. And it was definitely a life changer for sure.
But based on that, how do you these days dance the being and the doing? Because for a lot of us as society, we're really attached to the doing, and there's a lot of value that can be added in doing for, if it's done the right way with impact and
Sure.
influence. But how do you dance between those two, and how has your relationship with them changed over the last, say, 5 to 6 years?
Mm. I've been I've become really intentional with alignment. Right. I found in my life, especially as a former athlete, we always told you got to grind, you got to work hard, you got to. It's like there's many times that I quote unquote worked hard because I was out of alignment and it got me in trouble. So now I'm really intentional with my heart space and asking myself, does this really align with you right now? How does this feel? Maybe not where you are today, where you say you want to go. And through doing that, it's allowed me to grind less more. And now I align more. So I always tell people like become aware of like what resonates with you. And it's less about grinding and more about aligning. And then once you see, like, it will take a lot less forcing and a lot less energy once you are aligned. And a lot of times alignment comes in the form of coming to awareness of what's misaligned. I'm going through it right now in my life. It's like you come out of a ceremony, you're like, holy shit, I made that decision out of fear, that one out of guilt, that one out of shame. And the universe is like, nope, that's got to be cut off, that's got to be cut off, and that's got to be cut off. And now it's like, oh, wow, I don't have to work so hard now because I made these decisions out of fear.
What for you is that feeling when it comes to alignment? Like, I think of the word force when it's out of alignment, but what for you is that feeling so people can start to connect with what that might look and feel like?
Yeah, I know for me, the word like peace, smoothness, like there's a level of like detachment, don't care if it happens, don't care if it doesn't happen, and it just happens. It's like, you know how it is where it's effortless. And that's really foreign to the human ego, right? The ego is like, no, we're supposed to grind and we're supposed to work hard and we're supposed to, especially, the programs in our society that keep telling us that. But that's why I always tell people, like, you gotta know your heart and you gotta trust your heart, because your heart is where the alignment is. The head is where the grinding is.
What does that look like in terms of getting back to your heart? And speaking from, I guess, blokes' point of view, often in relationships, I'll often hear women say, I wish he was, he'd open his heart more. And I'm thinking, if he knew how to open it, he'd put the key in and just open it up. Like he's keen
Sure.
for it. He's keen for it. But what did that intentionally look like for you as you stepped into that more?
Yeah, I guess. So when I told you about the situation with my business partner, deep down in my heart, something told me, don't get involved. Don't do it. And I ignored it. And then when all of this stuff happened, I looked back on that frame of reference that my heart had. I felt this in my soul, like, don't do it. So I always tell people, like, sometimes we have to learn how to discern the difference between the heart and the head. The heart is super quiet. It's not loud. It's not like how the head is, but the heart also doesn't come from a place of fear. So that's how I can tell whether or not this is heart aligned and where this is head aligned. It's one's driven by fear and the other one's just like pure confidence of just a knowing without really knowing.
I think it's Teal Swan spoke about this, and I've seen it a lot. I can only assume that you get it in your work as well. People think one of the decisions they're making is it's their intuition. But to your point, intuition is subtle. Fear is where you feel some kind of elevated space. So I really like the delicateness of intuition that, to your point, doesn't really, you don't feel much. It's more just a knowing.
Exactly.
So where for you 6 years on or at the moment, is your inner child showing up the most in a way that might be kind of preventing you from the next expansion and evolution?
Yeah, it's funny you're asking me this off the heels of a 2-day ayahuasca ceremony. I was able to get pretty deep. I realized there's a traumatic experience that had happened when I was 3 years old of dealing with abuse from a babysitter, and I didn't realize that 3-year-old was carrying the guilt of it's fault. My babysitter would beat me if I would wet the bed when I would take a nap, and it created this subconscious program of it's your fault, it's your fault, it's your fault. So now I'm walking around with guilt, and we know that guilt leads to shame. So I'm minimizing myself, and I got to see, like, literally how it affects in business, how it affects in my relationship, how it affects with my children, and being a father. So that's one thing that, like, in my life right now, I realized how much shame and guilt of others I carry. Right? I won't make certain decisions or have tough conversations because I'm afraid of feeling guilty and carrying somebody else's shame. So I know for me personally, I'm in the season of right now letting that inner child know that, like, you don't have to carry anybody else's guilt. You don't have to carry anybody else's shame. And more importantly, you don't have to judge yourself anymore. So it's only been a week, but I can already see profound changes.
What's your process for moving through shame? Because shame obviously festers and builds when it's kept in the closet. Is it voicing it to your partner? Is it a therapist, friends? And again, how much do you communicate with your partner and how much do you divide what's coming up for you between partner, friends, coaches, therapists, etc.?
Yeah, so me and my wife we're pretty close. I share like when I feel shame. I started to realize that when I feel shame, I isolate myself. I get really quiet. I don't want to talk to anybody. And this was something that I dealt with from my father. When he would feel shame, it was a silent treatment. Well, what's wrong with dad? What's going on with him? Why is he? And I started to realize that I was doing the same thing. So in those moments when I feel shame, I want to get to the root. Who is this right now? Who is this? Is this the 8-year-old? Is this the 10-year-old? What version of this, of me, is this? And then what I found is if you can at least get to the awareness of which version of you this is inside of you that's coming up, that's enough to release the pressure so you won't feel the shame and be walking around with it. And then you can actually start to work through it. So if you get to the root, you can dig up the whole tree, but that's usually the hardest part because sometimes it's just more comfortable to sit in the shame because that's what we're used to doing.
So what for you is 2025 about? And how do you, plan for 2025 with all the skills that you've got? Like, what does 2025 look like for you?
Yeah, my motto for 2025 is to get up on the branch. So if you look at like the life of a caterpillar becomes the butterfly, but first it had to get up on the branch and die. So like my motto now this year, the energy is it's like, let's consciously do things that will allow those versions of you that no longer serve you to fall off, to die, whether it's healing past wounds, whether it's going on ayahuasca retreats, whatever it may look like, give yourself full permission to get up on that branch and let that version wilt away. So that's kind of the energy that I'm in this year. And now, like, once you start to do that, you start to move into more of like an abundant mindset. And that's kind of what I'm bringing to the world, is showing them like, hey, abundance doesn't have anything to do with your bank account. Abundance has more to do with your internal energetic account, and you have control over that. It has nothing to do with your bank account. But if you can control the inside, the outside has to correspond to it.
Mate, I generally go between like an hour and 15 and an hour 30 with podcasts, but because you are so well oiled in how you speak, I feel like I've got what I need. And again, for me, as an observer of coaches, like, you articulate better than anyone else. I just wanted to acknowledge that and thank you for that. It's such an amazing skill in a world that is very noisy to be able to pierce through that with very intentional language. For those that want to find out more about you and the work that you do, where's the best spot to send them?
Yeah, you can go to dgmindset.com. All my social media handles are at dgmindset. We got some exciting things coming up here. We got a live group coaching program where I'm coaching everyone. It's titled Abundance, and it's an 8-week masterclass of showing like how you make this mindset shift by increasing your awareness, healing past wounds to increase your performance. 2025, we have 3 more plant medicine ayahuasca retreats that we're having that will be transformational. We just got back from one 2 weeks ago, and that was those 12 souls that were on that retreat. They're still, I'm getting messages still from them, but this is it for 2025. My goal, my intention years ago was to help people remember what they truly were. And 2025 is the year to thrive, and moving out of a scarcity mindset and moving into abundance and really seeing ourselves for what we truly are capable of. And that's being infinite. So I always tell people, send me a DM, comment, let me know. I always like to reach out and have conversations with people. And yeah.
Awesome, brother. So good to have you on the podcast, and thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you, Blake. Likewise. And thank you for being so intentional with the conversation. I know sometimes I'm on podcasts and they just ask questions, but like, you're genuinely engaging in a conversation, which tells me your level of awareness and work you've done on yourself. So much love, man. I appreciate it.
Appreciate it, brother. Cheers.
All righty. Yes. All the best.